Hello lovely people, welcome to my mid-December reading wrap-up.
Doobie 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 doo. Doobie 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 Sophie vlogs.
I recently set myself 10 books that I wanted to finish by the end of the year, and I have been working through them in December. I thought it might work better if I did like this midpoint check-in and talk about what I've read on that list so far, and then at the end of December I can do like the wrap-up of the rest of them. I have 4 books to talk about. Shall we dive into it? Yes, yes, yes. I'm going to kick things off with this book is a new favourite. I loved it so much. This is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and I knew I was going to love this book. Like, that's why I put it on my list, because I was like, we need to, we're gonna love it. I literally finished this last night, and it is everything I've wanted from an Arthurian reimagining, plus a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't even know I needed, and I loved it so much. Okay, so this follows Bree. Hello, Bree. Her mother recently passed away in a car accident. She's just gone to college where she stumbles upon this mysterious Order of the Round Table. This is sort of both the story of her like becoming involved with this order, but also like trying to uncover like whether there was more to her mother's death than that might have originally seemed. I will leave it there because I don't want to spoil things. I loved this so much. I think that Bree is an absolutely incredible protagonist. There's a real like complexity and compassion that's given to exploring Bree's experiences of grief, and that makes sense because Tracy Deonn says at the back of this that all of that is based on her own grief from losing her own mother, and that really comes across like time is given, space is given to go through all of those complicated feelings that come from losing people. Also, like this intergenerational trauma that comes from being descended from enslaved people, and specifically in Bree's case, the order is based around the lineages of these Arthurian knights, which is very much like a white institution, and the ways in which Bree, not just walking through life on a campus that has historical links to slavery, but also then becoming involved in this order that very much so has roots within slavery and stuff like that. So both of those things I felt were handled with such complexity and compassion at their heart. Like, I just, Bree as a main character, I love her so much. She is so, like, at one point a character, like, describes her as a warrior, and, like, I get it because she survives and she gets through, but equally, like, we're allowed those moments when it is just all too much, and I really love that she wasn't just, like, strong and enduring. Like, we got to see where the walls come down and stuff like that. I thought she was wonderful. I think she's a brilliant heroine. On to the other things, because I could talk about Brie all day, but I won't. Another thing I loved about this is the action scenes. I enjoy action scenes. It's been a very long time since I've been sat reading a book and reading action scenes and thinking, God, this is a good action scene. You know, I feel like they are fast-paced and they really made me very tense and kept me on my toes, but in a way that also like is very much tied to plot. I felt like all of these action scenes are for a purpose, and in some ways we're moving things along and stuff like that. I'm not going to do any spoilers here, but there is a love triangle element in this, which I know love triangles are one of those things which we're like, no more love triangles, please. Number one, I would posit that Arthur Lancelot Guinevere love triangles are kind of fundamental to the Arthurian narratives, so you know it's happy. Also, like, it's a love triangle in which there is like a little bit queerness, and also like I feel interested to see where things will go. I feel like there are some really exciting possibilities. I don't know. It's one where this is my waffly way of saying that essentially, like, I know that there's like a common feeling where it's like down with love triangles, but actually, like, if love triangles are done well, I'm here for them, and this worked for me. Might not work for you, but totally worked for me. Also, I feel like I'm just babbling. I also really love the magic system. There is sort of like a discovery element as you go on, because Bree does not really understand what's happening to her. She is very much new to these ideas, so there is a lot of this text that you're with Bree and you don't fully understand why these things are happening or how they all work. But again, because you're experiencing it through Bree's eyes, that really works for me, because I feel like I went on the journey with her of eventually understanding why she has certain powers and how other people's powers work and stuff like that. So again, that's not something that was that's a complaint on my part. That's something that I felt like I was introduced to in a way that really worked for me. And then finally, just like the reimagining of King Arthur and this dialogue with it. It's engaging with the original mythos in a way that I found to be really interesting because I enjoyed like exploring and understanding the order, but equally like Bree is an outsider. She is treated like an outsider. There are people within this order that are inherently bigoted because they come from this noble lineage and it's all very, you know, white European and that sort of thing. And I just felt like this did a really interesting exploration of the ramifications of like ideas to do with like legacy and inheritance and that sort of thing, and people's feelings of entitlement to things, and a whole bunch of other things that, to be quite frank, I can't talk about because I know that there'll be spoilers. Also, I'm aware that like I feel like this is not my most coherent string of thoughts. I just really loved this. It did exactly what I wanted it to do, which was to reignite my interest in Arthurian mythos. I feel like she's bringing so much to the table as, like, let's engage with these things, and I want the second book immediately, and I'm probably going to read everything that she ever writes, because it was fantastic, and I loved it. After that is The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar. I loved this one too. This follows Nishat, who is Bangladeshi. Her family lives in Ireland, and she's 16. I thought the characters were slightly younger in this when I picked it up, but they are 16. I don't know why I thought they were younger. Probably just my brain. This is like when I thought The Black Flamingo was a middle grade book, and everyone was like, no, Sophie, it's YA. And then I read it, and I was like, oh, yes. That's on me. This follows Nishat, and essentially, in her business class, they are given this assignment when they have to sort of start their own businesses, and the person who has the most successful business will be judged by this panel, and then they win €1,000. As well as that, at a family wedding, Nishat bumps into a girl called Flavia, who she used to go to school with, who's just moved back to the area and is going to her school. Thus begins sort of like a friends to rivals to lovers trope, if you will, because Nishat decides that she's going to do a henna business for her business project because it's something that is inherently a part of her culture, and she's been doing it for family weddings and stuff like this. But Flavia also decides to do henna, and one thing that this book really tackles is this idea of cultural appropriation, because Flavia very much views it as like, it's art, you can't control art, and Nishat really struggles to get across to her what the importance of henna to her culture is, especially because Flavia's cousin is this girl who has been a massive bully, not just to Nishat, but also to like generally spreading rumours about her family and stuff like this. So although like the cover and everything make this look like a very soft book, and I've heard a lot of people use like the word soft to describe it, and I do see that because there is a lot of that in here, it is also dealing with some heavy topics like cultural appropriation, like racism, stuff like that. One thing that I felt like worked for me with this is I felt like we were given enough time to see the progression of that relationship, because one thing that I sometimes struggle with when it's like friends to rivals to lovers is kind of do bad things to each other when you're in the rival stage, and then you get to the lovers stage, and it's like if you don't deal with those enough, it can feel like you've skimmed over this stuff. And personally, I felt like this did a really good job of sort of like having characters acknowledge the ways in which they hurt other characters, or like did things which were not okay, and that sort of stuff. And I feel like that's really important to me when you're doing this type of story, that you have to have characters verbalize and be like, I shouldn't have done this, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, but now I do, those sorts of moments. So I appreciated that there was some of that in here. I think actually my favourite thing about this is the relationship between Nishat and her sister. It just felt so authentic to me. All of their interactions, whether they are supporting each other, whether they're having arguments, that sisterly bond, in my opinion, was one of the absolute strongest things about this book. And it just, I loved them both. I just felt like they were just, as like a trigger warning, there's also like a forced outing and stuff like this. So like, there are heavier topics within this that I think it is worth being aware of going in, that it's not going to be like a completely soft romance thing. Like there is a lot of bullying and stuff like that. Like there was a lot of stuff that I felt really like emotional reading about. Personally, I think that it was handled really well, and I think it was like addressed. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I again I know that she has another book coming out, I think 2021 or 2022, I can't remember which, but this is another author that I'm definitely really interested in exploring further and seeing what else they release as they go on. The next two books are my non-fiction reads. First of all is Fabulosa, The Story of Polari, Britain's Secret Gay Language by Paul Baker. Polari is a language that sort of developed in the 20th century during the time that homosexuality was illegal, and it was sort of this like secret gay language, a language that you could use to communicate with people which generally like the straight population would not understand. This was a super interesting book. It sort of goes through a variety of things to do with it. So it looks at like the linguistic roots of Polari, like where do these words come from, how could they have evolved, like proper like nuts and bolts, how do you build this language, are there grammar rules, all stuff like that. It also looks at like the social history, like when was this most prominent, why has it died out, and then it also looks at like changing attitudes towards Polari, so you know, something which used to be quite radical and that was like this way of you know, being able to safely communicate with people, and like a lot of people it was like tied to their identity. As time goes on, specifically in regards to like Round the Horn and Julian and Sandy and stuff, it became much less of a radical thing, and then when you had stuff like the decriminalisation of homosexuality, again, that changes the relationship to this language. For some people, Polari can be viewed as like a relic of the past that reinforces damaging stereotypes, whereas for other people, it's like a really important part of our history. So I found it all very interesting. One thing I will say for this is that this is a very white history, and I don't know whether that's because that is the type of people that used Polari, or whether it's like a slight oversight. There were some moments, like there was a brief moment where he mentioned how some of Polari language, specifically to do with talking about people of different races and stuff like that, can be viewed as quite offensive now. But he didn't really dive into that in a lot of detail. And occasionally there were a few moments like that throughout this. Like he mentions, and I think he's trying to make a point about how like times change and things evolve, but he mentions a point about one time when he was on a panel and he accidentally misgendered someone who was also on the panel. But again, he didn't really do anything with that, and I was just like, well, what's the point of this anecdote? You've just told me that you didn't take the time to really learn someone's pronouns. Like, so there were a few moments where I was like, could we delve into this? If there are these troublesome aspects of it, like maybe we could like dive into those a little bit deeper, which we didn't do. But one thing that I think it did do well is it was really helpful to get an understanding of specifically like British, but also specifically I would say probably English, like queer history, because he kind of is taking you on like a timeline. So he's like starting with, you know, he mentioned stuff like molly houses and stuff, so like more historical roots, and then like bringing it forward. So there is like quite an interesting like tracing of our history in this specific country, which I did enjoy, because I feel like a lot of the queer non-fiction books I've read have been not necessarily always focused on America, but like I think there is quite a heavy focus on America and Stonewall and stuff like this. But I just also want to make sure that I'm reading enough books that are like based around like my own country's history, you know? So that was also fun to do. So there was a lot that I liked about this. There was a couple of niggles which stopped me rating it higher. I did still give this a 4-star book. I found it very easy to read, I will say that as well, because I was really concerned at the beginning, because I'm not a linguist. I don't really know, like, I don't read a lot of linguistical books. But actually, like, I read this book in like a day. I found it extremely readable, and I found it quite like accessible in regards to the language. And I did learn a lot, and I think that now I have a better understanding of Polari, and especially interesting was the way that we're kind of viewing Polari now. Like, Polari is almost kind of being used a little bit as like this fun novelty thing, which is really interesting compared to how it's gone on this journey of being quite radical to being suddenly viewed as like stuffy. And then sort of now we're getting a little bit of a resurgence of people who are like reaching back and attempting to revive it. I don't know. It's interesting, is what it is. The final book I'm going to talk about is The Dirt by essentially Motley Crue, and then edited by Neil Strauss. This was interesting. I think that this is a very well put together book. I also think that every single member of Motley Crue is a terrible human being. I'm going to be quite positive about how this book is put together, but I really do not want to be seen to be condoning the contents of this, and that is going to lead into something that I'll talk about in a minute. But First of all, the narrative style of this is that chapters are from different people's point of view. Mainly the band, so the 4 different band members all have chapters throughout where they talk about things from their point of view. There are other perspectives brought in as well, whether that's their ex-manager or people from other bands, people who are also relevant to this, whose contributions sort of add something to it. And one thing that I think was done really well is that these narratives contradict each other sometimes, and I think that that's done deliberately by Neil Strauss, because he's highlighting the ways in which all of these people have their own understanding of the incidents, and they don't always correlate, and then you're in the tricky situation of whose word do you trust, and how much do you take these guys at face value? You know, like, in a very petty example, like, 2 of the band members have a scuffle. One of them claims that the other one throttled them. The other one claims that the other guy sucker punched him first. Whose word do you trust? Neither of them, in my opinion, but that's just me. And I liked the deliberate highlighting of, like, the artifice of the construction of this. And it's also framed in a way, like, all of the chapters sort of have this, like, flowery way of writing. So each chapter begins, like, the further adventures of young Nicky, his battle with a one-armed adversary, blah, blah, blah. So it has, like, this, almost like this mythologizing of them in these little, like, pre-chapter descriptions and stuff, which was, like, an interesting narrative framing device. I had a discussion with my friend Miriam, I'll link her blog down below if you're interested, about how much is this book, like, endorsing these people, because I really cannot emphasize enough how terrible I think these people are. Like, everything you might associate with being a rock band in the 80s is in this, you know. There's a lot of drug abuse, people battle their own addiction demons, and I in no way want this to sound like I don't understand the severity of addiction, because that's not my issue with this book. My issue with this book is that they all seem to be, like, giving to you. They're like, look at all these outrageous things we did, aren't we cool? But the outrageous things they did, like, at one point they literally are like, God, we pretty much raped that girl, didn't we? And then they move on. And there's a lot of moments like that. I think part of it is about, like, taking responsibility for your actions, and I don't feel like Motley Crue ever take any responsibility for their actions. They're just like, we do these things seemingly just because they can, and it's like, oh, aren't they cool? And it's like, no. Like, these are damaged people. So I appreciate that this book gave me a real understanding of their backgrounds, and based on a lot of stuff from their childhood, I understand why they act the way they do, and I see that they have a lot of traumas inherent in them, which then get exacerbated by, like, drug abuse and the types of lifestyles they lead, and I can see that and I can understand that, but that doesn't mean that, like, I don't think that they should all probably be in prison for some of the stuff that they've done. So this book pretty much is what my dad said it would be to me before I read it. He said that it's a very well put together book, but I will hate every member of Motley Crue, and I do. I do think it's very interesting. I would say, if you have watched the film of this on Netflix, the film very explicitly is portraying their story to you as sort of this, like, mythologized, aren't they, classic rock people type thing. The film takes out a lot of the bad stuff that they do. It really doesn't deal with a lot of the sexual abuse and stuff like that they doled out to women. Also, it tends to fudge the timeline a bit. It makes them look like much more of a cohesive, supportive band than they actually were. What I'm saying is I think that if you were to just watch the film on Netflix, you would come away liking the band a lot more. And I think that's to do with the fact that the film was made in 2019, and they had a reunion tour planned for 2020, and they're very much, like, trying to push this angle of, we got through all this shit together, but we're a united band. Whereas this book was written when Tommy Lee had left the band, and they were not a cohesive whole, and they just spend the whole book arguing with each other, and they don't seem to really like each other. So, this is my long way of saying that I think objectively it's a very well put together biography. I think that it is very possible to read this if you are, like, a classic rock bro, and come away and be like, oh, Motley Crue is so cool. I also think that it is very possible to read this like I did, and like my dad did, a very good portrait of a time in classic rock history, whilst not actually endorsing any of the vile behaviours that these people did, you know? So I would really like to give heavy trigger warnings to that for pretty much everything you can think of to do with rock bands, and then also some extra stuff like Death of a Loved One, Death of a Child, stuff like this. So very much one that, like, I would be cautious about. I would be like, go in with some awareness and that sort of thing. So a bit of a weird one to end on, because I'm like a bit conflicted by it, because I simultaneously think that Neil Strauss has probably done a good job, but I also really hate everyone involved. Those are the 4 books I wanted to talk about at this midway point. I would love to hear if you have read any of these. If you also have any thoughts on them, please do let me know in the comments down below. I have 6 books left to read for the rest of December. I don't know how I'm going to manage all of them, because I also have a bunch of books that I'm trying to get through because people have lent me books. So we shall see, but hopefully at the end of the month there will be a little part 2 check-in, and I'll sum up all of those books as well. But until that point, I hope you're having a very lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.